All right. So I'm seeing that it's running live on this screen. So that means we must be live on YouTube, I'm assuming.
We ought to be. Let me take a look here.
Charlie, this way.
Just checking if it's actually live on YouTube.
Here, come to me.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's live on YouTube. I can see it. So
nice.
We are here.
Great. Awesome.
This is the blind leading the blind, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm so bad at doing anything with computers, which is funny because I'm on my whole job is on a computer, right? But it's,
yeah.
I don't know anything about, like, it took me years to figure out how to use StreamYard, and it's one of the easiest things to use.
I may be blind, but I make a pretty good taxi driver.
Yeah. Like, no, I spent, before I had the RPG Pundit Encounter, which is my live stream show on my channel, for about 5-6 years, I had Inappropriate Characters, which was a live stream show that I had on another channel with another guy. One of the co-hosts was managing it, just because I had no idea how to do a live stream, right? So that was how lazy I was.
Yeah, with us, it was like we kind of had our comfortable format, which was like a pre-recording. But when you like basically said, "Hey, is this going to be like pre-recorded or is it going to be live?" It got me thinking about, well, maybe we should kind of take the plunge and try it live. But things have been so crazy around here. It's been nuts. So we've had very little time to figure it out. We do have electrical problems. So if the internet's been pretty good this afternoon, so I think it should be fine. If we do cut out though, Pundit, it probably will only take us another minute to come back on. So
okay.
Yeah,
I'll be keeping in mind of that. So
yeah, and then like if it's been too long, you can drop, but like. Just fair warning there. But yeah, no, we actually our air conditioning system quit working, and there's a massive heat wave right now going through the United States.
So fun.
And it's like it's cooking upstairs. So yikes.
Here it's the opposite. It's probably the coldest winter I've ever seen in South America.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. How cold is
winter
it
here? Obviously, upside down, right? So
yeah.
Very cold, very cold.
Yeah.
Well, it was so cold that that some people froze to death in the last couple of days. So
whoa.
Even though it never quite, I think it only got to like around 0. So for a guy who's lived in Canada, right? That doesn't seem like that much to me, but the Uruguayans all think they're dying. Right? They think it's the apocalypse.
Oh. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that is kind of funny. Well, not funny, but
Funny.
Because they're never used to anything that cold. Yeah.
No. Yeah. Gosh.
It's like when the Texans got snow.
Yeah. It's very similar.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they don't usually. We happen to skip it just right before that massive ice storm in 2021. So.
Charlie, go down.
Yeah. Wow. So, how long have you lived in Uruguay for?
Well, coming and going about 20 years, but the last decade or so has been pretty steadily me living here.
Oh, and you must like it. I mean,
yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like those. The countries in the north now where the cities are riddled with poverty and crime, So
yeah,
it's sad when the third world country, is in better shape.
Oh gosh, yeah. Rather live there in I don't know, Montevideo than Seattle or LA.
Well, there's way less crime, way less garbage on the streets, right?
Yeah.
There are some homeless people, but not tent cities or stuff like that. So it's a big difference.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
And the people are great.
Are they?
Yeah, they really are.
I'm sure. That's good. I know that you have a like a group that you play with locally there. I think you run
That's
a
true.
DCC game, right?
I have two campaigns that I run here, one in Spanish and one in English. The Spanish one is currently running Baptism of Fire, and the English one has for the last 12 years, it's the longest campaign I've ever run, been running my World of the Last Sun setting, which is a setting that was made for Dungeon Crawl Classics, and we use Dungeon Crawl Classics to run it.
Oh yeah. So hence that's why
I've got a book, but I don't have it here, so I can't show it to you.
Yeah, well, yeah, a little bit of context for you kids. RPG Pundit, he's just talking about some of his products that he has. World of the Last Sun. That's kind of that's the Gonzo one, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is Gonzo fantasy. It's sort of weird. It's very different than almost anything else I've ever published, because usually I publish stuff that's based on like history and mythology and stuff like that. But
yeah.
It's been such a successful campaign, and I published 3 books for it. The World of the Last Sun. Sorry, 2 books for it right now. The third one still hasn't come out. World of the Last Sun and the Gonzo Fantasy Companion. So the first is the setting, and it's just this really weird set, because I looked at the Dungeon Crawl Classics rules, and there's stuff in it that when you look at it in a normal fantasy setting would make no sense at all, right? Like the one that got me was the arbitrariness of the gods, right? That if you're a cleric, and it doesn't matter how good you are, how holy you are, or how important the situation is, you roll a die, and if you get too low, then you don't just fail, but God punishes you, right? Or
Yeah.
whatever your God punishes you, right? For no particular reason, right? It's deity disapproval, right? So I thought, well, what kind of world? Because you got to build the world to fit the game, right? Or vice versa, right? But they have to match. So I saw, what kind of a world would it be where God or the gods are just basically, randomly giving people punishments, right? And especially their supposed, anointed priests or whatever. So I came to the conclusion that would have to be a world where God or the gods had gone crazy, And from there, I jumped to, well, what if there isn't a bunch of gods? Let's say there's just one God in the world, but that God is actually a computer, and that computer is malfunctioning because of something that happened thousands of years ago that has wrecked the world, And that was the basis of World of the Last Sun, right? From that point on, I figured out how to make everything else ridiculous and weird too,
I think you've just told the future with AI.
Oh my gosh, we were just talking about this.
Hey, Pundit, do you know how I see like commenters on the stream while I'm streaming?
You should have some kind of option setting, and somewhere in it for you, because you're the one who started this, there should be something that says something like show comments on chat.
Oh, okay,
I'm not sure if you've had any comments on chat yet.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, that's.
If anyone out there is watching, please make a comment on the chat to show us if it works or not.
Yeah, because we're just testing. First live stream ever. Very experimental. So
I like it.
Yeah, well, I sure appreciate you coming on with us.
That's great. I don't know if you guys know, but I was already subscribed to your channel before you did that hilarious video.
Really?
Yeah. I had subscribed to your channel. I think it was right after you guys had Diversity and Dragons on.
Oh, good.
I think that caught my streaming of the YouTube app, and so I watched it. I said, "Oh, okay, that's good." And then I added you guys.
Oh, that's awesome! Thanks for adding us. That's kind of humbling. That's great. Yeah, I bet you didn't expect the next video coming out, huh?
No, I really didn't. I figured you had no idea who I was or something, because you guys have a family channel and you're wholesome. I mean, I can kind of understand Diversity and Dragons catching you, but I would think that a guy who starts his every video with a swear word is not necessarily up your alley.
Well, I've been subscribed to you for years. It feels like, so I've been enjoying your content for a long time. Yeah, and of course, Diversity and Dragons for probably about as long. And
it can't possibly. Well, maybe it can be as long for you. Yeah, he's got a much newer channel than me, though. He's catching up really fast.
Yeah, he's got a great channel. I absolutely loved having him on. Yeah, I hope to have him on again sometime. With now, I don't know if you saw, we actually have 2 videos directed towards you. One is from like a year ago. It's called "Watch Out, RPG Pundit," and we had like books up on our couch, and we had little kittens there, and we were trying to like imitate your style.
I see, because of the cat. Okay.
Yeah, because it was like, because we were like, hey, we got kittens. We could do a video like RPG Pundit, and like. So,
well, I got to tell you, it works. People. I mean, I don't get just cat lovers, right? But any gamer that likes my channel probably likes my cats as much as me. So
yeah,
I usually only have one at a time, but
yeah, people love seeing Domino. She's a sweetheart. Everybody loves her, and
so cute.
Everybody loved the meatball so much.
Yeah, she was great too, and Chungus was the first one.
That was before my time. Yeah, never knew Chungus. Yeah.
She was huge. If you watch some of the earlier videos, she's there. Yeah.
Oh,
was
really?
a big cat. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's too bad I didn't.
Yeah, Meatball was really liked after Chungus passed away. Meatball, who I had at the same time actually at that point, but she was she was less interested in being on camera, right? And then for some reason after Chungus died, then Meatball started showing up more on camera. Domino is not very. She hasn't learned her acting skills yet, right? Like she doesn't. When I'm recording, she doesn't just spontaneously show up usually. Like so, that's why there's relatively few videos that I've got where she's appeared, because I don't force I don't bring my cats over to be recorded while I'm doing it, right? So
we did.
Usually, like Meatball was super into it, right? Because she'd see I'm doing something, so she'd jump up there and want to see what's going on, right?
Yeah.
But Domino's still little, so I suppose that might come later.
Yeah. Oh, that'll be interesting to see how that develops. Yeah, I'm interested to see that.
She's got quite a personality. I'm pretty sure she's like cat bipolar or something, because like half the time, any given time, she shows up, comes over to you. There's a 50-50 chance that she is there because she's going to want you to like cuddle her and pet her and stroke her sides and all this stuff. And the other 50 chance is that she wants to bite and viciously attack you, and you can never tell, because it's not till the moment you touch her with your hand that you know what she actually wants.
Yeah, that really does things to you.
My other cats were. Oh, look, she's here. She's on the other side of the camera, but she's here. My other cats were generally not aggressive with me. They were very aggressive with other cats. So I'm hoping that once she's able to go outside by herself, she'll like use that aggression on other cats or whatever, and not on me. But right now sometimes she'll attack me in my sleep. Right, I'm like especially when I'm just lying down for bed, covering up. It's cold right now, winter, and then. Yeah. All of a sudden, I see something hits me, like smacks me right on the nose, right? So she comes running up, hits me, and then runs off, Here's a little culprit now. Let's see if we can give you guys some extra views with this.
Oh,
there you go. There's Domino.
Oh, look at you.
She's so cute.
She's got that white down her nose.
Yeah, she's 7 months old now, so we're about to spay her, so after that, she'll be able to go outside by herself.
Yeah.
That's what our cats need.
Yeah, we're getting around to that.
Say no to teen cat pregnancy.
Yeah.
Very bad idea. So until then, she can only go outside supervised.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's very good. Very responsible. It looks like Mike is saying that Domino has eclipsed your popularity on your own channel.
Well, I think there's certain viewers who have always felt that my cats are much more interesting than me, you know, and I don't mind because I'm still the one making the money. So.
Yeah. Yeah, basically, yeah, you kind of live off your cats, huh?
Well, not exactly, but because I don't actually, unlike most YouTubers, I don't live off. YouTube is a tiny fraction of my earnings, right? Because I'm mostly a game designer, right? And my books are what make money. Now I have the YouTube because on the YouTube I talk about RPGs so people notice me, and I promote my books and they sell better. Every time I do a YouTube video, my sales go up. That was Domino. She's now attacking with her webcam.
Good thing you're wearing pants.
Yeah, no, I've got a blanket on too because it's cold. Every time I do a video, and some of my publishers let me track sales in real time, right? And when that video comes out, within the first few hours of it coming out, my sales spike, and it does that every time. So I'm making a little bit of money from like views, right? Because I am monetized on YouTube, but it's not. Get over here. It's not it's not anything really compared to the sales from my books, right? So I use YouTube mostly as advertising. There's a big difference between YouTubers, RPG YouTubers, for whom that is their like main source of RPG related income, and YouTubers who don't have that, right, and who don't do that. Because for me, it's not like I don't need to do a bunch. I'm not an influencer sort of type of guy, right? Because I don't need to, because I'm just promoting my books and my stuff, and it's the books that sell. But if the YouTube channel itself is like making you money and it's the main source of your money, some people go kind of crazy with that and they start doing stuff like, for example, doing stuff to try to fit the algorithm. You know, they become grifters. They become like desperate to build up an audience, right? And the thing is, YouTube comes, it ebbs and flows. It goes in cycles, and so I've seen some people who at the beginning seem to be like really good YouTubers, and then they just went nuts because they were, you know, about protecting their brand and stuff like that, and they started becoming aggressive and paranoid to other YouTubers and things like that. See, I never have that problem. I in the RPG Pundit encounter, I have every other episode. I try to introduce someone who's kind of more or less unknown as either a game designer or a YouTuber. But with other people, like that would be, they might think, oh, but I can't promote my competition, right? You can promote my competition, right? I don't feel like anybody on OSR YouTube is my competition, because I'm not in the business of doing videos. I'm in the business of selling games, and I'm one of probably the best OSR sellers around, right? Like, I guess my competition is like James Radji and Kevin Crawford, right? Who are also really big sellers, but and they probably both sell more than I do, to be honest. But I don't see that really as competition either, because we're all part of the movement.
Right. Yeah, and you're very prolific as well. In fact, this might be a good segue into kind of like an intro to RPG Pundit, like for the kids and anybody who might be unfamiliar. So kids, I'm not sure if you knew, but RPG Pundit, not only is he a well-known game designer and like critic of the industry, he was also hired as a consultant during the game design for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, back before WotC was like really woke and weird.
Obviously.
So, he was part of the team that helped make 5th edition a commercial success. And then they kind of ruined it after that. But like,
years after that.
Yeah. So
he can mark the place where it all went like really bad, because 5th edition was never my favorite game, but I was hired to make the most successful game possible, and I was hired because of what I knew about game design and review. And so I was working directly with Mike Merles, who was the lead designer of 5th edition, interchanging emails on a constant basis for months about looking at every little rule, every little detail, but also at the meta level of like, what do you want this game to achieve, right? And the last edition had been the worst edition they'd ever had before. 4th edition was a very poor selling edition because it had decided to like be kind of the anti D&D, right? Like they changed the rules in a very extreme way, and they made the game be something that could only do one thing right, which was kind of this gamified, combat-centric system, right? And I had predicted when 4th edition came out, as soon as I read what the rules looked like, so years and years ago, I had said that 4th edition was going to lose 2/3 of the market for Wizards of the Coast. And at that time, I wrote this in my blog. I didn't have YouTube; didn't even exist at that time, or maybe it did, but it was just starting, and I wasn't on it. So I had a blog, and I wrote this in my blog, and I had a lot of people who read that blog in the same way that I have now people on the YouTube. And one of them was a guy who was a game designer who had been an indie designer that was pretty unknown for the most part. Then he worked for a little bit with Monty Cook, and then he got hired by Wizards. And that guy's name was Mike Merles. And at the time that 4th edition came out, Mike Merles wasn't the boss in D&D. He was just one of the guys there. But he had been following me for years, right? And so he remembered that I made that prediction when 4th edition came out. And by the time 4th edition went under, he was the boss at D&D, and he contacted me and he said, you know what, you were exactly right. That was exactly the amount that we lost, and we could never get it back. And so he wanted me to present the kind of ideas that I had for how to make 5th edition more successful. And so what I said is it's got to be an edition that is super easy for casual players, because 3rd edition and 4th edition, both in slightly different ways, demanded that you had to really carefully read the book, know all the rules, and if you did that, you would always end up having a better character and being able to do things better than someone who was kind of like, there for their first time, or who isn't that interested in learning every rule of D&D. So we created a system that was going to be as close as possible to allowing both a casual player and a really serious player to play at the same level. And the way you do that is by removing what's called meta currency, which are parts of a game system that don't have anything directly to do with what are you doing right now, right? Like that question that we always ask in the middle of an RPG. Okay, so you've open the door, what are you doing now? Right? If you have to answer that by declaring a bunch of different special powers or spending points or things like that, then that is entered into meta currency. If you can say, well, I'm going to attack, and then I, as the DM, say, okay, roll to attack. You have advantage or whatever, or disadvantage. Okay, there you go. And that's it. That's all they need to know. Right? So doing that made it a game that people could play without having to pour over all the rules. And it brought in a whole bunch of people who had been kind of either on the fence or had played and then left, or people who discovered D&D and pop culture with things like Stranger Things and Critical Role and all that, and then came in and started to play. So it became the most successful edition of Dungeons and Dragons. And then Mike Merles eventually got fired. They erased the names of all of his consultants.
Not before they shoved him in the broom closet. He didn't get fired before they shoved him in the broom closet there at Wizards of the Coast.
That's true, yeah. First, that's right. First, he got reassigned from his job as head of D&D. And it was that moment, and from then onwards, that you see a real change. Because before that, the 5e adventures, and again, I'm not a player of 5e. I designed it not for myself. I designed it for the type of people that I knew WotC needed to be able to get a commercial success. But the adventures during the Merles era were not, like some of them were above average, some of them were average, some of them were below average, and they had one or two like tokens towards wokeness, right? Like there was, for some reason in the Waterdeep book, there's a gay pride parade going on or something like that. But But for the most part, they were adventures. They were adventures that were similar to the adventures that you saw in every other edition of D&D. But after Merle's leaves, the books that get planned, starting with Candlekeep Mysteries and going from then onwards, were not, because the people that came in then were people who had the woke agenda central in mind. So you have these products where, like, in most of them, they aren't just about being woke. They're also directly opposed to the concepts that exist in D&D, in the same way that with like TV and movies and things like that nowadays, people will make these, like Star Wars, you know, the Force, what's the first way? No, it was The Last Jedi. The guy made that movie to say, look, all the stuff that they tell you in all the other Star Wars movies is cool and heroic is actually evil and wrong, right? You need to do the opposite, right? That's what that movie was in a nutshell, right? And they've done the same thing with, I don't know, with superheroes and with everything else, right? And in the RPG context, the way that they do this in an adventure is that the adventure is altered from the traditional ideal of heroic fantasy. The adventure of D&D is of a zero to hero sort of thing, the hero's journey, where you start as a first level farm boy and you're going into the dungeon, into the underworld to destroy these creatures, this evil, and to come out with the treasure and to gain fame and power, right? And typically to do good, but you can have evil characters too, right? The left hates the hero's journey because it's tied to all these things that they don't like, right? To individualism, to like colonialism, to the idea of the
proving your own situation, right?
The idea of not just improving your own situation, but that you have a duty to better the world, right? And that sort of thing. And it also always delineates clear lines between good and evil. It's one of the reasons why in like the new 5.5 edition, they've essentially eliminated alignment altogether, right? Like I think they still mention it somewhere, but it serves no purpose anymore because they can't tell the difference between good and evil and law and chaos, right? So like in these later adventures, sorry, what were you saying?
Oh, I was just gonna say, yeah, absolutely. Like they're always blurring the lines. There is no like good or evil because like all the monsters are good guys, orcs, right? And then all the
and now orcs are Mexicans.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah, and all the good guys are like anti-heroes. They're all like they got this bad looks, bad streak to them. You know what I mean? And
the ultimate example to that, I think, is in the Ravenloft, in the new Ravenloft book. So Ravenloft is a setting that was based on traditional Victorian horror, right? It was like Frankenstein and Dracula. Well, the original module of Ravenloft was about basically you go to fight Dracula. They didn't name him Dracula, he's Strahd, but it's the same thing, right? And it's like the old Hammer horror movies. It's meant to be very moralistic Victorian horror fiction, right? And in the newest Ravenloft book, they basically threw that right out the window. In the older editions of Ravenloft, one of the details of playing in that world is that there was a world where the forces of darkness were stronger in presence than the forces of light, right? And you could gradually become corrupted by the darkness if you did bad things. And so eventually you would end up potentially being tempted with what was called a dark gift, which was something that made your character more powerful, but it began a process where you would inevitably start to become more and more corrupt and evil until you went crazy or completely bad, right? And basically turned into one of the Dark Lords of Ravenloft. So it was understood by most people to be something you should avoid for your character if you want your character to do well. But for some people, they like to if they wanted to play a bad guy, they would like to skirt that line where they would be trying to get just enough to get the powers, but not so much that they then fall, and it was very tricky. But in the new Ravenloft, they just said, oh yeah, there's this thing called the Dark Powers, and everybody can have one. You just decide, you roll one, and you've got it. And it's because of the Dark Power of Ravenloft, but it doesn't actually do anything. It's just a superpower, right? Everybody get their superpower from Satan or whatever, and it has no consequences whatsoever, right? So it's
Hey, cool.
Just-
What's your dark power? Yeah. Oh, that's lame.
Now,
And
there are other worse examples too, though, right? Because in Wild Beyond the Witchlight, where they made
you get
sorry,
you get. I was just making a joke. It's like, and you get laser eyes,
Yeah.
and
Oprah's
get
there.
and you get
laser
regeneration.
eyes.
And that guy over here, he's invulnerable.
yeah,
Well,
It's like
speaking of like
promoting
dark,
Satanism.
speaking of like dark powers and RPG Pundit, I actually am an owner of one of your books, Cults of Chaos. And
It's probably the book I'm most proud of when it comes to designing random tables.
yeah, I want to recommend this to any viewers that are watching because, you know, this is a great resource if you have any interest in having like cults, like spice up your D&D game. You know, this is the book to get because it's just chock full of random tables and really great artwork too. That is really evocative. So you can basically go through and quickly roll up, you know, different kinds of cults randomly for your game, and it's all laid out for you in here. This is a really quality product, and as I recall, it was pretty affordable too. So that's my plug for Dark Albion Cults of Chaos. Now, it goes with the Dark Albion product line that Pundit has, but you don't have to own Dark Albion to use this book. It's very, very usable, even if you have no idea what Dark Albion is, because it's pretty generic as far as like you know, system.
Yeah, I mean,
and
Dark Albion is just basically medieval England with you know, fantasy stuff. So it's if your setting looks a bit like medieval England, you can use that without almost any changes. You know?
Yeah. Now, I know that you do a lot of like medieval authentic. I'm assuming that this is part of that because it's Dark Albion, right?
Dark Albion was my first medieval authentic product. It was so that's a source book for it, but the original Dark Albion, which I don't have on hand right now, is a setting which was, it's basically the War of the Roses in England, like not, you know, not some other fantasy world. It's basically England, but an England where there's real magic, there's real monsters, and that magic and those magics and monsters are based on what real people in that time thought of about magic and about monsters, right? So like the magic is the way magic worked for them, and monsters were monsters from actually British folklore and stuff like that. So I do have
elves
the
were
rule
a lot
book.
creepier.
The rule book that goes with it is Lion and Dragon, which is where I codify the rules for, you know, it's an OSR product, so it's compatible with any other product, but for example, the magic system and all of that is here, and it's not the standard memorize spells magic. It's a ritual magic system that is based on what real people in the 15th century thought magic worked like. And the setting itself is basically the War of the Roses. It's a 30-year period from 1456 to 1488, and it covers that whole war, and then it's got a kind of Game of Thrones sort of style to it, because I detail all the different noble houses that were caught up in the war. There's the timeline, and then there's a bunch of adventures, and so you can have an adventure, you can have a campaign in it which is very medieval or just a little medieval, and you can have a campaign in it that is very focused on the war or the politics, or a campaign that's just basically you guys are adventurers in the middle of this war, you know. So there's a lot of different options for it. And that was kind of the start of it. Yeah. After that, I've done a number of other medieval authentic products.
Right, and that's kind of something that you're very known for, especially. And your current product, Baptism of Fire, is selling very well.
That's right. It's Baptism. It's one of my biggest books, actually. And it's the same. It's basically the same system as Lion and Dragon, but with a bit of expansion. And the setting is, instead of the late medieval period of the War of the Roses, I go back to early medieval, And in this case, it's set in early medieval Poland at the time of the baptism of Poland, the Christianization of the Polish people, and the conflicts that occurred in that time between the pagans and the Christians in that world, in that setting. You know?
So if someone really wanted to, they could take Baptism of Fire and play that, and then like take those characters into a Dark Albion setting as well, and just kind of like, you know, it'd be like
the rules would be the same.
Yeah, the rules would be the same. Like the timeline isn't quite there, but like if you just kind of, hey, it's D&D, so we're doing it kind of thing, it would work out really well.
Yeah, and I mean all of my settings and adventures are essentially they're OSR compatible, because the OSR is the same rules for everything, right? And there are some variations. I have some special rules in there, a lot of which were later ripped off by Shadow Dark. And I don't think on purpose. They just had the same ones as me. So like I have random level benefits when you level up, and I have a ritual-based spell system, so you have to roll a die to see if your spell succeeds. The rules on clerics are super different, because the clerics in this setting are usually they're Christian saints, you could say, right, or Christian holy warriors. So I changed the way their powers work totally again. So neither of the magic systems are the traditional D&D magic.
Well, we started doing a roll to cast in our game. Kids, what do you think about the roll to cast that we've been doing?
I love roll to cast. It's my favorite thing, except when we roll bad. Josh killed 3 people.
Well, yeah, I think that was from Friendly Fire. I think if that was our last upload, like he basically like, oh gosh. Well, they killed a retainer, like, they hit somebody Friendly Fire like 3 times, and it's like, stop doing that.
All him.
Was that with a spell that they hit him, or was it with
a sling? And so they were in a narrow hallway, and they were trying to shoot past, and they kept rolling low and
in my game, I have a rule about how that works, which is if you're firing into melee, like let's say one of your allies, and it's in Lion and Dragon and in Baptism of Fire. If you're firing into melee where one of your allies is fighting one or more other dudes, or a group of your allies are fighting a group of the other dudes, you can make a choice at the time you roll the die. You can either try to fire with a -4 penalty, and if you miss, you miss, right? Or you can fire without the -4 penalty. But then if you miss, it means you don't hit the person you were trying to hit, and you take everybody else and you roll a die at random where the choices are each of those people, and then one extra choice that is you don't hit anyone, right?
Yeah.
And so you roll at random and somebody gets hit. It might be another enemy, but it might be one of your allies, right? And so then you never know who you're going to end up hitting if you don't take. But if you take the -4 penalty, it means you're like being extra careful to just try to hit that guy, and you might miss him, but then you won't hit anyone else. So it allows ranged attack players to make a moral choice that a lot of times is really funny, right? Because they're like, well, that guy, I know that Bob's player, he's got a barbarian and he has like 70 hit points, so screw it. I'm just gonna fire and not take the penalty. And he misses, he hits Bob, and Bob ends up being hit on with some kind of serious damage, and you've killed Bob because of those extra hit points damage you did him, stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, I know which option of those Josh would choose. So.
Oh yeah.
There's always. It's actually very interesting as a study of players, right? Because there are some players that will never ever miss doing the -4 penalty, right? Because they do not want to hit an ally, or just out of an excess of caution. Then there's other guys that never ever take the -4 penalty. If I hit you, that's just the grace of God. Sorry, buddy.
Yeah, caution to the wind. Yeah.
If he dies, he dies.
So Pundit, with this, because Dark Albion was like a medieval authentic series. So the cults in here, that must have been like, was that like what people thought cults were doing in medieval times, or what?
Well, not every one of the cults in there is a real, like, historical cult, but it is, like, especially if you look. Sorry, I'm pulling out my own copy here. If you look at because I haven't looked at it in a while. If you look at the way you generate a cult in Cults of Chaos, which, as you said, right, you can do a set of rules that takes you like 5 minutes to roll, and then you look at it and figure it out, and you've got, like, not just an entire cult, but an adventure surrounding that cult if you use the tables with, like, resources and complications and everything else. But the first thing you determine in the game is the social class of the cult, and that's on purpose, because in the Middle Ages, social class was so important, right? Like, the difference between being a peasant and being a city dweller and being a noble was so huge, and being a member of the clergy or anything else. And we know that there were, like, in accounts of heresies and witches and things like that in the Middle Ages, that they acted very differently depending on what background they came from. And so, peasant cults aren't going to look the same as a cult of, like, rich merchants from the city, or a cult of noble women or things like that. And so in that section, I used a lot of historical aspects of real life groups that probably didn't typically call themselves cults, but they were heretics, and often secret. Heretics acted in secret, that had specific goals, So like in monasteries and then later in universities, there were cults of, like, scholars that were looking to obtain kind of, if you believe their propaganda, to learn the secrets of the universe, but from the point of view of some other people, they were consorting with demons, right, in sinister ceremonies. And there were ladies' cults of noble women. There's one very famous one called the Guglielmites in Italy that were huge, that were all basically either nuns or rich wives of nobles that had created a secret society that was based on the idea that there had been the leader was a woman named Guglielma, and she had made a prophecy that God had now announced a new age where women would rule over the church, right? And so she had declared herself the popess of the world, the new popess, right? And they had made this sect of women who were recruiting other noble women to try to manipulate the entire region of Italy into creating a revolution where women would take power in the church, and there would be female popes instead of male popes. Right? They were eventually discovered. It was hugely scandalous. And
sounds like the devil's first attempt to introduce feminism.
Yeah, well, it wasn't. It's a real example of a kind of proto-feminism,
Yeah.
And it's fascinating because if I didn't know for sure that it was real, I wouldn't believe it, right? Like if I hadn't, like, looked at the original sources. It's crazy. I was tied into, like, a lot of these Roman families, like the Italian families, where they were all a bunch of degenerates. This started with a family called the Viscontis, who were the Sforzas, who were really mixed up in, like, the worst parts of Italian politics, but then also, like, half of them were into all kinds of weird stuff.
Oh yeah, Godfather.
It is, and a lot of the deities I talk about in the that these cults worship, when you have stuff like the Green Man and these nature gods, and then you have the Star Elves, for example. That sounds like I'm just doing a riff, and I was to a certain amount, about like UFOs or something like that. But it's actually real, right? Like in the British Isles, and especially in, like, the Gaelic areas, in Wales especially, there was this belief that there were elves that came from the other side of the veil, and then there were elves that came from the skies, the elves from the stars, and when I found that, I said, okay, that's fantastic, I have to include that. And then I have a lot of classic Christian cults, like you have the Manichaeans and the Gnostics and that sort of thing.
Yeah, the Manichaeans they're mentioned in the Bible, in Revelation, are they not? or my oh no, that's the Nicolaitans maybe. Sorry, I could be mistaking.
Yeah, the Manichaeans came a little bit later, but
yeah, you're right. Sorry. That's very interesting. Yeah, wow. So much there. Well, speaking of one more thing before I move on, because I want to talk about secret societies, but now I'm gonna always think about like googly eyes, because that's what they sound like. Proto feminists with googly eyes.
in my last old school companion, I have one of the sections in that book that has just come out recently. I think I've got it. Just one second. I've got it over here. I have to promote.
Yeah.
The old school companion 3, right? Which is it's full of stuff that you can use in any OSR game to make your game a little more medieval. And this is the third one. The first one was full of different medieval material. The second one was medieval adventures that were all based on like real medieval events or stories or legends, or sometimes even like poems or songs. And this one is the third one, which is the final volume, which is again full of content, and it's got a section on it that is about medieval secret societies, and some of them are like literally real secret societies from the time, and some of them are secret societies that are kind of possibly existed, and then there's some that are kind of inspired by that same style, and there are some remarkable ones.
Which or which? Is the book clear about which are in?
No, not entirely. Like I like to leave it up for grabs, but okay. For example, the Googliamites are detailed in one of the, they're one of the ones that designated.
Well, that's fascinating. Well, speaking of secret societies, Pundit, you and I have something in common. First of all, we're both Alberta boys.
That's right.
Yeah, and secondly, we're both brethren of the Mystic Tie.
Aha.
So through the Grand Lodge of Alberta, I assume that's.
I think I knew that about you. I don't know from where, but
yeah, I commented on one of your videos about it.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, that's probably it.
Yeah, I didn't expect you to remember, but so we kind of have like a bit of a link there, which is really cool.
Commercial 81.
Yeah. It's been a long time since I've been active. Been years since 2018. I've been inactive, unfortunately. It just doesn't.
That's a shame.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to justify right now. I just got so many things going on in my life, but maybe one day, and then maybe I can introduce some of my boys into the lodge, or we'll see how that goes. But
here in South America, there's a whole bunch of. It's really weird because there's a whole bunch of lodges from the Grand Lodge of England that are scattered around South America. Because everywhere the British went, not just their empire, but anywhere they traded, they'd build lodges. And those lodges are still part of the United Grand Lodge of England. So when I got here, I joined one of those. So now my career is with the UGLE instead of the Grand Lodge of Alberta.
Wow. Oh, interesting. Yeah, I lost my certificate in one of our moves because we moved around a bit, and I'm really frustrated about that because it's like, you know what? If I ever try to get back into it, that would be hard to do.
If you were initiated in the Grand Lodge of Alberta, you just have to get in touch with the Grand Registrar, and they'd be able to find you in the database.
Good.
You'd have to prove who you are, I guess, but that's
yeah. Okay, great. Well, I might
probably charge you for a new certificate, though.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Okay. Well, that's fair. All right. Well, good. Now there's some crazy current events going on right now in the gaming world that you actually made a video about.
I thought for a second you were going to ask my opinions on Israel or something.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's crazy too. Wow.
All right, so what's going on in the gaming world? Maybe I missed it.
Yeah, well, no, you made videos about it. It's our old pals Jeremy Crawford and Chris Perkins got new jobs, and it's I guess bootlicking for Matt Mercer. So I give us your take on that, just real quick.
Okay, so my take on that is that these guys, first of all, the reason why Matt Mercer brought them in is largely because they have a lot of name recognition among 5e players, which doesn't mean that they're good at their jobs. In fact, I know for a fact that Crawford wasn't, and Perkins is just, average. They're not great designers or anything. If they were, because think about all the other great people who worked at some time for Wizards of the Coast, and when they left, they all ended up making their own stuff. Like, look at Monty Cook, right? Monty Cook made 3rd edition. Then after that, he made Monty Cook games. They made a ton of, product, and he made a lot of money from it, right? And you see that over and over again from different people. But these guys, they're not talented enough to do that, right? So instead they need to work for someone, And Matt Mercer, he just put out this Daggerheart game, which is a terrible game. It's in terms of design of how it's made and what it does, it's bad. But I think clearly he wants to try to do everything he can to make it succeed. So he's just like hired guys, right? So it's like, you own a tire store and you bring Dale Earnhardt's cousin to sit there and sign autographs or something, right?
Yeah.
It's a publicity stunt, I think, mainly.
Or if you have
maybe
a small
given
RPG channel, and you bring RPG, if you have a small RPG channel, and if you bring like RPG Pundit on, it's like doing that.
Well, sure, hopefully a little bit of a better celebrity draw than that, but yeah, maybe. No, it is kind of that, right? Because they don't have anything to do, right? It would be different if they were hired when they were still designing Daggerheart, right? But Daggerheart's done, so now maybe Perkins and Crawford will make some really bad adventures for it or something. But this is largely they were there more than anything for name recognition, right? To give like the impression that Darrington Press, which is the name of their company, has more gravitas than it actually does,
Which is insane, because like these are the guys that like took a successful product
and ran it to the ground.
Yeah, ran it straight into the ground. All they did was they took 5th edition and they made it gayer, and like very much so, and then they just kind of it onto the market, and it's a disaster. No one's buying it, and no one cares about it. No one's playing it. And then they're like, well, we did a great job here. It's time to leave. And then and then they get hired by Mercer. It's crazy. It's unbelievable. Tweedledee and Tweedledum getting hired.
People, a lot of 5e players recognize Perkins and Crawford because they did a lot of live streams, a lot of events on social media,
promotional
and because
stuff.
Crawford somehow was the one that got the job of where people would ask about rules questions, and he would give the definitive answer, right? And for some reason, 5e gamers wanted to hear a definitive answer from an authority figure. But the irony is, like, Crawford at the time that 5e was being designed was not very high on the totem pole, right? He had very little to do with any of the actual design, like that was happening above his level. And Perkins his job didn't directly connect to the design part of it, right? And Perkins has another real crazy qualification, which is that he was very active at the time of 4th edition, and he was one of the main architects of the new 5.5 edition, right? So he personally was deeply involved with the 2 most disastrous editions of Dungeons and Dragons of all time, right? He helped wreck D&D twice.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
And that's the guy they hired.
And on sort of the subject of Daggerheart, I do think that it has a good chance of being a commercial success. I also think it has a great chance of just absolutely flooding RPG horror stories. Every single new video by RPG Horror Stories creators is just going to be all about Daggerheart players, how they're trying to be the next Critical Role, all that stuff.
That's a channel about bad experiences playing RPGs. Yeah.
And that's one of the main problems with Daggerheart, right? Is that it is a bunch of Critical Role. It's going to be in the short term, it's obviously going to be a success. A whole bunch of people, thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe people, bought the game before it even came out, right? Because they are Critical Role fans, and so they just pre-bought it. And so in my video, I point out, one of my videos on Daggerheart, I point out that the Daggerheart isn't really, it is technically an RPG, right? But its product category is not really an RPG to be played. It's merch. It is Critical Role merchandising, right? And so a bunch of people are going to buy this book. We know, for example, there were studies that were made of Critical Role fans where they were polled about how much they played RPGs. And 50% of Critical Role's fans, and Critical Role has, like, at its peak at least, it had somewhere around 4 million really serious fans. That's a lot of fans, right?
Yes.
And more than half of those, when polled, it turned out never played RPGs and don't ever want to play an RPG.
Wow.
So they were watching Critical Role the way you would watch, I don't know, Desperate Housewives or something, right? Like they were watching it as a show. They weren't interested in the game. They were interested in the show and the actors and the people. And then of the other half, about half of those had only very occasionally played, right? They played 1 or 2 games once or twice, right? And then the last quarter were people who had played somewhere more than that, but most of those were 5e players. And we know for a fact that 5e players, people who started playing with 5th edition, their average campaign lasts 6 sessions, right? So it's a very short campaigning period. There's a lot of casuals on purpose. I mean, I helped make it that way. Right? I'm kind of to blame. There's a lot of people that play D&D on and off, right? Or and don't play it very seriously and don't play these long-term campaigns like a lot of OSR campaigns are.
Right. Yeah. 6 sessions is not much at all. Yeah.
And what it is that is going to happen with Critical Role is that with Daggerheart is that Daggerheart is tied to Critical Role fandom, right? Very few people who don't like Critical Role are going to buy this game.
Right.
And so it will succeed initially for sure, right? It's made a ton of money for the Critical Role people, for Matt Mercer and company. But after that, a whole bunch of people who bought this game will never play it. A whole bunch of them will play it once or twice and then quit.
Yeah.
And then other people will play it a bit, and some of them might play it a lot, but only a certain percentage. But this will also depend on how popular Critical Role keeps being. And there's a lot of evidence that Critical Role is already, it might not have jumped the shark yet, as people say, but is already on the decline, right? It's already starting to lose. It's not at its peak anymore, right? And it hasn't been for like maybe a year or more already.
Well, if you ask a certain YouTuber, they need that Orion Akaba guy on there really bad. But
the guy who was high on crack.
Yeah, I don't know much about it. I just know there's a bit of an inside joke there. What you've kind of looked at the rules of Daggerheart, Pundit. What are some of the main flaws of the game as you see them?
Well, I was talking about meta currency a little while ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
Daggerheart is full of meta currency, and it's crazy levels of meta currency, because the way they made their basic mechanic is that you roll 2 different 12-sided dice, and you add them together, but the 2 dice are different, right? One of them is hope and the other one is fear, right? So every time you roll for any kind of check that involves those 2d12, which is like everything, every time you do an attack, right, or stuff like that, whichever one of those 2 dice is the higher, you either gain 1 hope point or 1 fear point. And that then affects the game, right? If you gain a hope point, you suddenly have a what's sometimes called a Benny, which allows you to then spend that at some point to make something happen, right? To change the reality of the game. And if you roll the fear die higher, then the DM has to introduce something that gives you a disadvantage of some kind. And that happens every single time. That is insane from the point of view of RPG design, because you can have an RPG that does that once in a while, right? Like in a way, a natural 1 and a natural 20 are kind of an example of that, right? Where if you roll a natural 1 in some games, you could say, well, you don't just fail, you fail especially badly, right? Like, and even there, you shouldn't do that every time you roll a d20. Like, for example, in my game in Lion and Dragon, most of the time, if you roll a 1, nothing happens. You just fail. You automatically fail, but that's it, right?
Yeah.
But if you're like doing demon summoning, which is like medieval old school demon summoning, where you've got like the magic circle and the triangle, and you're waving the censer, and you've got the magic ring and the magic wand, and then the demon appears, and then you have to bind it in the name of God if you want to control it, right? And if you roll a natural 1 when you're trying to bind the demon possesses you instead, right? Because it's very dangerous to summon a demon. Right? It's very powerful, but
you have a very bad day.
So there, if you get a natural 1, you end up being possessed by a demon, right? And that is that's a good example of using that kind of mechanic. And on the other hand, natural 20, a lot of times, for example, in combat, that might be a critical hit, right? And that's what I do in my game. If you get a natural 20, or if an opponent gets a natural 20 against you, that's a critical hit. Now there you have to have a very careful kind of critical hit table that doesn't kill you automatically every time, right? But that has a gamut of risks, right? That you roll another die, and then maybe it's a little bit bad, or maybe it's really bad, right? And that's good because it keeps up a sense of danger to combat even at higher levels. Those are good uses of that kind of thing, but it doesn't. You notice that it doesn't involve any meta currency. It just automatically happens, right? It doesn't give you points that you then decide to trade in or anything like that, and it doesn't force the DM to do anything. But if you're doing a meta currency thing every single time, that means that the game is just a constant set of dramatic twists and turns, right? That, like, obviously, it's very clear that theater kids made this, right? Because these are like. These have to be people that want 100% drama all the time, every second.
Improv all the time too. Like
this is like that'd be like the joke about M. Night Shyamalan always having a twist in his movies, just taken up to 11.
But they kind of
like imagine if every scene had a stunning twist, like it's nuts.
Yeah, it is, and you're kind of like at the mercy of the dice, right? Because it's like oh, now something bad, and like all the time, and it seems a little bit actuarial as well, because it's like you got to keep all these points for
No, that's why they have like in the box that they have these little stones that you use, and you have to keep track of how many hope points you have to spend and stuff like that.
But even like, and I know the OSR can be a little actuarial, like with the, doing encumbrance and stuff like that. And I don't mind that because that's like, resource management in the game. But this is like, it's kind of like introducing what I feel like is like an annoyance, because then it's like, now you've got to improvise something, off the top of your head because, the dice said so, and they keep doing this over and over again.
The biggest problem with that from the point of view of gameplay, in any RPG, the thing that you want the most is what's called immersion, which is where you are really getting into your character, and your character kind of takes up a life of its own, and you really feel like the place, like while you're playing, like that's a real world, right? And you do that by effective emulation, which means that the world has to seem real, right? It has to not look like it's just what you could call a Potemkin village. It's just a prop, right? It's just something like a backdrop for you to adventure in, right? It has to feel like there's stuff that's happening that you're not involved in, and that that your character doesn't have the power to change the world around him, except by the actions he actually takes, right? So resource management is part of that emulation, right? It's like, well, okay, you can't carry a piano and a giant chest and a pet golem or something in your arms as you're going along. Right? You have to figure out how much you can carry, and you have to make some choices about what you keep and what you don't, right? That increases the sense of emulation, because it means we have to deal with real issues here, right?
And random encounters as well.
In the world,
right?
Random encounters are the same thing, exactly. Yeah. And a good random table will have a whole bunch of stuff that you'd kind of expect you would encounter, and then a few things that are like real wild cards, right? That are like stuff that's more dangerous or more weird, but that don't happen as often as the regular things, right? If you make a table and everything has the same chance of happening, it's not a very good table.
Another YouTuber named Scuddifer Mike, who I subscribe to, he was talking about this, like about how, these things increase immersion in the game. And he was talking about random encounters and how they do that because, you can come up against like a random monster and like it could, not necessarily be interested in killing you, like maybe they're trying to get somewhere or something, they want to trade information. It gives you the sense that there are other things going on in the world that aren't all centered around you,
That's
like
right.
there's
and that's
other
why, for example, in my setting books, I have event tables that happen. So you're traveling from one town to another, you get to a new town. The DM, before you get there, or the moment you get there, you can roll on a table to determine what's going on in this town right now. Something that is happening topically, and the next time you come, it'll be something different that might be happening there, or nothing important that's happening there. But anyways, the problem with the stuff that happens in Daggerheart and that sort of mechanic is that it does the opposite. It makes the world seem less real because it's no longer predictable, right? Every time you're using one of these things, whether it's the DM having to introduce a new negative plot twist or you making a positive plot twist, it makes it feel like the character is somehow changing reality around him, right? And a lot of times it ends up, especially if you're doing it every single time, it makes the world become non-predictable, right? It's like there has to be all these sudden events that happen. It's too much. It's too much drama, right? It's the difference between reading a history and watching a soap opera, right? Where you expect a thrill a minute or something.
Yeah. Kids, I'm curious in your with your take on what we're saying here. What do you think about the Daggerheart based on what Pundit has described?
As a theater kid, I feel like you don't need to have that much improv, that much plot twists in a D&D game. Leave the improv for the improv nights at your local theater.
Well, the problem with one of my earliest videos about Critical Role is that was a video that I said, and forgive the going a little bit PG-13 here, right? But that Critical Role is to RPGs what porn is to sex, right? It's not real, right? It's an exaggerated mockery of what the real thing is, right? And so it's so people who first experience D&D through Critical Role have an unrealistic perspective of what actually playing in an RPG is, and this is even something, it's got a term, it's called the Matt Mercer effect. Of people who, like, the first thing they ever saw of D&D in action was these guys playing their supposed game on Critical Role. But Critical Role isn't really a live play in the sense of most live plays. Most live plays get very few views on YouTube because they're often, like, it's sort of like fishing or golfing. It's exciting to the person who's doing it. It's not necessarily exciting to the people watching it. And that's normal. That's part of what an RPG can be really exciting when you're playing. But if your girlfriend is sitting there looking at you, she's like, "What are these? What's the point of this?"
My wife won't play. She doesn't want
to.
For example, right? So when you're playing, it's exciting, right? But because these guys are all actors in Critical Role, they're all C-grade actors. They are running a game of Critical Role where it's not really a game. It's a stage play where they are playing the role of people playing in an RPG, and they're doing this with. I mean, if you're familiar with theater, with improv mechanics, right? They're using a whole bunch of stuff. If you know improv theater, they're tapping that particular resource quite a lot in their videos, and so when a normal person who watches that first and says, "Oh, I'd really love to play a game like that," and then they go to somebody and join their gaming group, and they get terribly disappointed because a real game doesn't work that way, right? It's not, like it does. There's no camera, first of all, but then also it doesn't have that kind of excessive over dramatization and all of the kind of emotion and all the sort of intensity that this pre-made, commercialized sort of show about D&D, which is not really a real game as such, technically, that it has in Critical Role.
Yeah, and I've heard of DMs like nervous about being DMs because they can't compare to Matt Mercer, like that. And to me,
which
it's
is
like,
crazy because
yeah,
as a DM, he's pretty terrible. Actually, he's great as the MC of that show.
Yeah. Two different skill sets there. Yeah. Have you seen any of our live plays? It's okay. You can be honest.
I've watched them. I'm not a big fan of watching live plays, as you might have guessed. But I have watched a little bit of, when I see it, on my YouTube stream, I'll sometimes turn it on and watch for a while, if I'm just kind of, browsing YouTube at the time.
Well, I'm curious, what's your observation? What's your observation?
Well, I think that it's the ones I've seen is mostly you've been running kind of very traditional, old school style dungeons.
Yeah. And
I think you're doing a good job of that, of the kind of dungeon adventure. I myself, in my campaigns, I've run a lot of dungeons, but my campaigns, I tend to make them somewhat more immersive in the setting because, obviously because of how the kind of games I run are really influenced by my degrees, in history and comparative religion and stuff like that. So as a historian, I usually end up playing games that are either literally set in historical periods, but usually fantasy versions of them, or that are very inspired by that kind of thing. So I'm big on like the social aspect of the setting, and stuff like that. So like my Dark Albion book came from my Dark Albion campaign, which is like I ran that whole campaign of the War of the Roses, and the player characters were agents that were working at different times for one of the two sides in that conflict, for different nobles. They would meet these characters from history. I've had a few of my players that say, I think I ran a Roman campaign, or a campaign on the Roman Empire once, and one of my players said, what I like about your campaigns is that they're exciting and they're super accurate, and then at the end of it, I feel like I audited a college course or something. I think he's like, I know so much more about the Roman Empire now than when I started, that sort of thing. I do a lot of that kind of play where there's often there's definitely a lot of aspects of showing the social part of the world. The action is tied to different, like I always kind of run sandboxes, so they're tied to different factions of the world, what's going on in different cities or countries or places at the time, and I tie in a lot of mythology and that sort of thing. So when in my campaigns, I think maybe depending on the setting, right? Like in World of the Last Sun, they probably go into dungeons about a third of the time, which is pretty high. Though I don't do a lot of mega dungeons. It's rare for it to be like a dungeon that lasts many, many sessions. Mm-hmm. And then in other games, like in Dark Albion or Baptism of Fire or Sword and Caravan,
see Domino.
The characters will go into something equivalent to a dungeon, maybe 10% of the time, right? And the rest of the time they're having like quests, outdoor adventures. In Baptism of Fire, it's there've been, because it's got this theme of like the
Poland,
religious conflict in the time period. There's been a number of adventures where the characters have either done things for the church or they've been sent on these epic. There's this one that it's one of the adventures I have in my Pundit Files PDF series. It's called The Bones of St. Florian, it's an adventure where the characters have a holy man receives a vision of the lost relics of a saint, right? Of a real, and he's a real saint. Saint Florian's a real saint, right? And they go on this epic quest, traveling across Poland and into Slovakia to rescue these bones that have been lost for hundreds of years and return them. And that's actually based on a kind of, I don't know if you want to call it a myth, because technically it's real, of a claim that the early Polish Catholic Church had of having recovered those bones. So it's I like to integrate that sort of stuff into my campaigns, and
that
so
would
they
be
have
a really good quest.
And political intrigues and things like that.
Yeah, that would be a really good quest. Yeah, you're right. We are very dungeon heavy. In one of our recent ones, like we went back to the keep because we're playing B2 right now, and we actually, the whole session was kind of, just like role-playing interactions and things like that. But that was certainly an exception. Yeah, I see Domino.
She's about to do something naughty. I'm pretty sure.
You do something bad.
You're about to get sneak attacked for double damage.
Well, no, she's very far behind me, but I think she's going to try to jump on a shelf she shouldn't jump on.
I can see your shadow.
Her little head there. That jacket was a gift from a former president of Uruguay.
Really?
Yeah, I never wear it, but I've just got it hanging there because it's, kind of cool.
Yeah, it's totally cool. Man, you must have liked Baptism of Fire a lot, huh?
Now we know each other through other channels.
Yeah, well, that's good. Very good. That's kind of an exception in our plan. It's kind of like
People of Borderlands is fantastic. The Caves of Chaos is one of the most important dungeons ever made, right? It created the idea of a dungeon ecosystem.
Yeah. We are having a lot of fun with it. We'll see where it takes us. I think I would like to continue with putting some intrigue, with their different interactions, you know what I mean? Maybe back at the keep and stuff like that. But right now they're kind of in the thick of it in the dungeon environment.
For sure.
So we talked a little bit about, Daggerheart and all that stuff. And I think they also have like cards and stuff in the game or something. I don't know. It seems like a hodgepodge of popular games into a confusing.
They do. They integrated all these cards that represent different abilities that the classes have. So you have to like put together these. Your character will have these different special abilities, and he's got a card for each one that you then I don't know. I think it's mostly there for you to know what your powers do, but then you show it to the DM or something. So I'm going to do this, that sort of thing. But okay. I'm betting that they're going to have like a whole different, like every time they try to make a new product, there'll be a bunch of more cards, right? And that leads to, just like in if you remember 3rd edition, you had feats, right? And every new product of 3rd edition added a bunch more feats that became more and more unbalanced as they went along. Right? So that's another classic mistake of game design,
Yeah. And another thing that I noticed, like in current D&D, didn't they like make it so that the humans aren't really baseline without bonuses or minuses? You know what I mean? They had to actually give humans a bonus to do certain things.
If I remember now, pretty much it's actually turned into like humans, I think, get bonuses that they can choose where they put them.
Yeah.
And they've done a lot of weird things. Like basically, you can get like, because they have, I forget what the terms are for them exactly, but there's like one characteristic that represents your heritage and another one that represents your background, sort of. So like you could say, well, like to put it in real terms, I'm Latino, but I was raised in England or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you get one ability based on one of those and one on the other, and so you can end up having like characters that are, you can have like an elf that can get like a trait that's an elf trait, but then he can get like, I don't know, an orc trait from his background if he was raised by Mexican orcs or something.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Down in Mexico.
That is part of like the agenda of saying, well, there are no real, there's no such thing as race or culture or gender or any of these things, like these are all.
Yeah, they're not tied together. Yeah, it's like you can, you can be, from this heritage, but you're just like this other group instead, and it kind of gets silly.
If you play a Catholic Latina, then you'll get a chancla that just kills every enemy.
Possible. Well, that's another thing. They got the combat wheelchair in there. And,
they do. They went there.
And I commented like it's so incredible. So it is an explicit rule in Daggerheart that if there's a character that has a combat wheelchair, the DM is not allowed in the game to damage that wheelchair in any way.
What?
Unless everybody in the party agrees that it could be damaged. Right? So it's not even just you're the guy. Let's say you're the guy that is playing the guy in the combat wheelchair, and the DM says, "Well, this is explosion. Your wheelchair is probably damaged." You go, "Yeah, that makes sense." But then you ask the other players, and I know Josh there says, "No, I disagree because that would be ableism, right?" And so then even though you want to do it, and even though the DM wants to do it, the party says no, right? One person gets the veto, and it cannot be damaged, right? It's insane.
Yes, it is.
This ridiculous level of wokeness. It's just beyond.
Man, it's a great thing that my combat wheelchair is made out of Wolverine's skeleton.
That's basically the idea.
That doesn't even make any sense. Well, combat wheelchairs never made sense.
No. Well, I'm my next, not the one that's coming out right now. I got this PDF series called the Pundit Files, which comes out every few weeks on the Red Room store. I don't know if you're familiar with the Red Room. They're really great. They have a YouTube channel. They have a publisher. Yeah.
Sorry, can you say that again?
The Red Room.
Yeah.
They're a publisher. They're from Portugal, and they've made dozens of RPGs, and they have their own little store because they got banned on drive-thru. And I do this periodical there every 3 weeks or so. I put out a new PDF, and each PDF just costs $3.50. Right, and so if you can get $3.50, you can buy an issue of the Pundit Files, and not the one that's coming out this week, but the one that's coming out in. Not the one that came out this week. The one that came out the week. The last one that came out is called. It's a dungeon that I made. That's called the Combat Wheelbarrow Main. And basically a riff, because at one point in one of my videos I made a joke about how a combat wheelbarrow would make more sense than a combat wheelchair, right?
Yeah.
And people commented on my video. They said you have to make the combat wheelbarrow. You have to, right? And so I thought about it, and I decided to do that. I did it with a dungeon that is in the form of this kind of contest dungeon. It's really interesting. It's obviously making fun of the combat wheelchair. In fact, the backstory is that there was this noble woman, or that wanted to be an adventuress, and then she had an accident. She fell off a horse. She lost the use of her legs. She refused to be healed by the cleric, even though there was a cleric there that could have healed her instantly, because that would now destroy her new lifestyle. And instead decided to create a wheelbarrow that would, she'd have a peasant cart her around, and she'd go adventuring that way. And then she went off to adventure, and on the road to town, she was waylaid by bandits and killed, and everybody laughed at her. Right? And then after that, a crazy wizard showed up and heard this story, and he was inspired by that to create a dungeon that is intentionally meant to be it's like a contest. Every year that dungeon appears. It comes from an extraplanar space, and it appears in the world. And it allows for 8 teams of 2 people to go in, but you have to go in with a combat wheelbarrow. One person has to be in the wheelbarrow, the other has to be the driver. And it's a very maze-like dungeon. It has a lot of turning, twisting corridors, and has a bunch of rooms. And the contents of the dangers in the dungeon and the contents of the room shift every year, right? They change. And some of the stuff that's there one year won't be there the next, and other stuff will be. And these 8 different teams have to go in and they fight, or they make their way through the dungeon trying to find the ultimate prize, which is some really huge treasure that changes every year also. And if you don't have one person in the wheelbarrow for more than a few seconds, you get eliminated and you're teleported out of the dungeon. Right? If your wheelbarrow breaks and you can't repair it within a certain amount of time, you're eliminated and you're out of the dungeon. And the contest ends either when everybody is eliminated or when the first person shows up and gets the ultimate prize, right? And it does this once a year. So this is like a really unusual kind of dungeon. It's a dungeon that every time you generate it, it'll have different contents in the dungeon, and it's based on this like contest format. So I think it's a really interesting example of a dungeon design that is way out there.
That's great. Go ahead, Sonny.
You immediately made me think of Tron.
Yeah, well, it's got elements of that. Yeah, for sure.
And just like the guys racing in like the tech cars, but instead it's just like these 2 guys pulling wheelbarrows with these paraplegics in there with like cannonballs going boom.
Yeah, exactly. And I've got like a selection of different combat wheelbarrows that the local people create. The local artisans create. That's some of them are made for speed. Some of them are made for like armor protection. Some of them have special features, and depending on how much you spend, you can get a different type of wheelbarrow. And it's a fun module, but it's actually like a real thing. It's not just a joke, right? It's a dungeon that you can really
actually play it. Yeah,
it'll be a fun game.
Yeah, that's very unique. Oh man, yeah. It seems clear that well, first of all, there's not enough mockery going on, not nearly enough about the dungeon wheelchair. But it seems like Mercer is going after the D&D 2024 crowd, but I don't know. Yeah, and they're out there, I guess. They're not buying D&D 2024, so maybe
they definitely aren't.
But like the people
because the other thing, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the other thing is it's not just Perkins and Crawford. After them, a number of people that were in charge of like the design part of D&D have either quit or been fired in these last few weeks, right? Like they are shutting down that entire department, it looks like, because I think that they realized that it's just not working, which is surprising because the last time they had an edition that didn't work, they kept trying at it for years, but I guess they learned that lesson.
Yeah. You're going to throw away money trying to, keep it going, and it's just not worth it. Sunk costs. Well, Pundit, like if Merlin or Gandalf waved his magic wand and you became the head of Wizards of the Coast, what would you do on day one?
Well, I'd have to fire everybody else in there right now because what they have left, they've gotten to the bottom of the barrel. That's another thing that happened as soon as Mike Burles was removed, is that they stopped hiring people who actually have skill in game design for the most part. They actually started to hire people who were not like that. They were friends of people that were already working there, but they had no experience in D&D. So you see that like in the later 5e books, a lot of the people that are writing are people that are first of all, there's a whole bunch of people that worked on cookbooks and vegan cookbooks, because there's one guy who was into that and he just hired all his friends, and none of them had any experience with RPGs. And then there were other people that were like feminist bloggers and other types of writers and stuff like that have no idea what they're doing, right? And there's increasingly less of the people who are actually knew what they're doing were still around. So the whole that whole division has to go, right? You have to get totally new people in there who have some kind of experience in actual, not even just game design, but in knowing how to write and publish for RPGs rather than the nonsense that they're into now, right?
Yeah.
And then besides that, I would try to go into like more of a return to roots, but continuing to still have a system that was actually had appeal for casuals, right? A system that is not that doesn't require system mastery. Where it's not that like the guy who's read every last rule is going to be able to make a much better character that's going to outshine everybody else, right? Because that's something that really hurts RPG groups as a whole, and it hurts the business because obviously Wizards likes people who want to buy every book to read every rule because they're spending money. But what they don't get is that the more you cater to that group, the more casuals go away, right? Because they end up playing with that guy, and that guy, just outshines them in every way and out-lawyers them and everything, and it's not a good experience,
Yeah, maybe different product lines would be the answer. You know what I mean? Like, because then you could like, hey, look, you want to be your, you want to have your zoo party of adventures, like Dragonborn, whatever. You got this product line. You want to be.
That's the thing. One of the principles that they had used from like late 3rd edition onwards is that every adventure or every setting that they were making has to have everything in D&D in it. It has to have all the monsters, it has to have all the magic, it has to have all the spells, and that's a terrible idea, right? It's really bad. I don't know why they thought that was like, they thought it was good because they thought it meant that people wouldn't feel gypped that they can't have like orcs in Dragonlance or something like that.
Right.
But it's stupid. It's a stupid idea, right? What you really want to do is you want to create settings that are noticeably different from each other, like that, and adventures that can focus. Like you could do an adventure that is in a world where there's only humans, and there you go, and you've got that, right? Or a setting where none of the like typical races are there, or where only the classical races are there, just elves, dwarves, humans, and halflings, right, or whatever, those different types of campaign books are going to suit different people, but that will catch a wider net, because otherwise every setting now looks the same. Even like we proved this because even like Ravenloft ended up being just another campaign world because they weren't willing to make it into a world that was about Victorian horror,
Yeah, and like the thing is, like the more they make like this unified D&D product that they've been doing since 3rd edition, the more they make it like gayer and gayer and everything, the more it pushes out like people that are like more normal, and they just lose interest, and then they lose those dollars. It's insane, and like so now they're like their target market is like blue-haired commies, and it's like, well,
it's non-gamers essentially. It's their target market are people on Twitter that will like talk about how cool it is now that that you have like transgender female to male barbarians, but won't actually buy the book, right? That's the part they don't get. Twitter likes does not make them money, that's the problem.
Yeah. And their Sunday evenings are not spent, playing the transgender barbarian or whatever, you know what I mean?
It's kind of a Bud Light scenario, right? Like you're not addressing your audience, and the people you are addressing are never going to buy your product.
Yeah, that's right. They take a look at it and they're like, ugh, I'll try something else. And some of them, will find the OSR, but others will go to like substitute forms of entertainment, like, I'll just play video games or something, forget this. You know what I mean? Which is too bad.
Well, the OSR always does better. I mean, it's ironically, it's against my own self-interest for D&D to do well, because the OSR always does better the worse D&D is doing. Like the moment the OSR really took off first was when 4th edition happened. And when 5 editions started to crash about 5 years ago, that was when there's a direct line. You look at it in terms of like Kickstarter sales and drive-through RPG sales, the OSR starts going up. And it has for the last 5 years. Every year, the OSR has been doing better than the year before. And it has now outpaced third-party D&D 5th edition products in like the realm of Kickstarter. So it's actually more popular than third-party D&D products. So
Wow.
that's because people stop playing D&D, right? And they're looking for alternatives, you know?
Yeah, that's right. Well, that kind of brings me to my next question, Pundit. The future of the OSR and the importance of the OSR. Can you give us a little bit of your take on that?
The future and the importance of the OSR. Well,
yeah.
The future of the OSR to me still looks very, very good. You know, there's a lot of people that repeatedly have predicted over the years that the OSR was dying or something, and it never turns out to be the case. A lot of people who predicted that were woke people that just wanted it to die, and then but then other people were like, you know, there's only so much you can do, right? And I think that we've proven in the last few years, especially, that that's wrong, right? Like the OSR at the beginning was just people rewriting the old rule books and making new adventures, dungeon adventures, wilderness adventures, things like that fit those rule books. And that's what's called the first wave of the OSR. And that lasted till about 2010. And then after that, you started seeing, and really one of the first ones that did this was James Raggi with Lamentations of the Flame Princess. Games that were based on D&D rules, but were not an exact copy of any of those rules. And that usually introduced a twist, right? So Raggi created a game where you had a version of the D&D rules that was still, like today, it looks super vanilla compared to stuff like Baptism of Fire or whatever. But it was sufficiently different that it made the game more lethal. It removed a whole bunch of like the offensive magic spells. So like you didn't have Fireball. The only attack spell a wizard really had was like Magic Missile and Heat Metal maybe. And it made the game more lethal in combat. There was no resurrection spells, and those little changes make a very different game, right? And that was the beginning of the second wave of OSR, which was where basically, to summarize it, was people playing around with the rules, right? And making the rules a bit different, which makes the game a bit different. And then the third wave OSR is when people started making settings that were specific to OSR rules. And you see this in a way that kind of begins with Kevin Crawford's Red Tide, which is a setting that he made of like this Japanese type island, but at the end of the world, and it's like a very weird setting, and that he made the rules fit that setting, right? So the rules are made for that. Now, in a way, I could say I could take credit for that too, because one of my earliest OSR products was Arrows of Indra. And Arrows of Indra is Dungeons and Dragons, but if Dungeons and Dragons was made for Indian mythology instead of for, you know, Western European fantasy, right?
Yeah.
And so it's literally based on the Mahabharata, you know, the stories of Krishna and the Kurukshetra War and all that. And it's got all these monsters and magic and stuff that comes out of India, right? And so the setting is made for that. But it was a pretty primitive attempt on my part. So I'm fine with Kevin taking credit. And now you have people going to really experimental areas, right? That there's a lot of RPGs now. I mean, never mind that there's like different genres, right? Kevin Crawford most famously did stuff with Stars Without Number, which is one of the best sci-fi OSR games. But now there's a lot of other OSR sci-fi games. There's Gonzo stuff. There's like the weird stuff Venture Satanis does. There's the Red Room, which is like done like, I don't know, 40 games in 2 years, and or 40 books at least in 2 years. And their stuff is all in like one genre, which is basically like spaghetti Western style moral ambiguity in all these different settings, you know. So like you can be like, you know, they literally have Wretched Country, which is like, you know, it's a spaghetti Western RPG, but then they also have like the spaghetti Western in space, the spaghetti Western in, you know, 19th century Europe, the spaghetti Western, and the fantasy setting, and so on and so forth, right? And they're all great. And there's a lot of room still for innovation and for the development of making stuff in new settings. Operation White Box, that's Dungeons and Dragons, but if you're a commando in World War II, right? You're fighting you're in a commando unit going on missions in occupied Europe in World War II, right? And it's great. So like the thing about the OSR, the reason it's the most successful RPG design movement of all time is ironically because it did what every other design movement got wrong, is that they said, we want to move away from Dungeons and Dragons, and we want to make something new and different and cool, and there's no limits, right? And when you have no limits, you also have no structure. And what the OSR did from the beginning is it created like a box, right? So this is the box. You have to paint inside of this box. There are certain things you can't change, or else it's not OSR anymore. Mm-hmm. But everything else you can change. And so the secret is, to be OSR, it has to be compatible with the other OSR books.
Right.
But if you're creative enough, you can do almost anything with that, right? I did the Invisible College, which is a modern day occult horror RPG that is set in the present, but it's an OSR game. Like there's a ton of these different things you can do with it, and you can change stuff as long as the core mechanics stays the same. That works because it makes people have to. When you have if you have to paint by certain rules, but then you're free to do other things, you're actually going to end up finding more precise ways to be creative than if you're just told, well, paint whatever you like. It doesn't matter, right? So that's the difference, and it means that also for the people that like D&D, the OSR allows them to be able, in terms of marketing, it means that my OSR games are not actually in competition against other people's OSR games in a real sense, because if there were two different systems, then they'd have to pick, well, DM Dad's RPG or my RPG, their rules are totally different. You can't do anything with one mixed with the other. But if they're both OSR games, that means that I can pick up, and I do this all the time. I've got a huge library because people send me books to review, and most of them are OSR. And I can pick something out of any book from there and port it right into my game with almost no effort, right? No conversion. You don't have to change anything because it's the same base system. So I can just get like monsters from somebody else's adventure and just put it in mine, and I don't have to do a thing about it other than half the two books, right? So it means every OSR product you get is part of a bigger and bigger collection of stuff you can use in the exact same campaign. Like you can grab, like you said, my Cults of Chaos. You can take that and you can use it in OSC. You can use it in Labyrinth board. You can use it in DTC. You can use it in any OSR game. It's not going to be difficult to introduce. And that's another big advantage that it has. So I think there's going to be a continuation of that. I think that the third wave OSR is going to continue producing cool and interesting stuff. As for me, I'm going to keep making probably a lot more of the historical, authentic stuff, but I am fiddling with a few other things. I'm working on a science fiction setting that I wanted to do. I have a science fiction RPG called Star Adventurer, which is my shortest full RPG. It's only like 32 pages or 36 pages long, but it's it's only rules, right? It's very tight. But in those rules, it lets you build what kind of alien races you want and what kind of setting you want. And so I'm going to do a world book for that. I didn't do it when I started because I was using it to run Star Wars, but now I decided, well, I should probably do a setting for it. So that's going to come out.
Well, that's exciting. No, that looks really cool. We got a question from Mac. So Mac is asking, Pundit, what's your opinion of that white box World War II RPG? Is that different from the one you were talking about? The Operation White Box?
I assume he means Operation White Box. And my opinion of it is very high. If you want to run an RPG that's, that's that specific setting, right? Because it is very. It's interesting because you can have some OSR games where you can do a lot of stuff in the context of the setting, and then some that are meant to be really precise, right? And this one is is pretty precise. You're playing a commando unit of some kind, special forces unit of some kind, in the theater of war in World War II, right? And going on missions. And for that, it works really, really well as far as I can see. I've reviewed it. I've never actually run it, but I think I know enough about design to say that I think it would be very successful. And if you like military RPGs, I'm sure you'll like that. You might want to modify some of, thing about people who like military RPGs is that they usually know a lot about guns and tanks and things like that. And so when I did Invisible College, which is set in the modern era, I just said, well, you have guns, there's pistols and rifles and stuff like that. You can have a scope or whatever. And then I've had like several people contact me and going, well, I made this list of all the different types of real guns that there are, and these are what I think their stats should be, right? Because everybody has an opinion about that if you're like into guns, right? Yeah. And I'm not really all that into guns, so I didn't know it. I just said, well, I just did the generic thing. But it's easy enough if you are one of those kind of people to just add that to the game, to create differences between types of pistols and rifles. Yeah.
I think that might be, for me, that's a little bit overkill. Although I did play some Palladium books, Heroes Unlimited and stuff like that, and there's different calibers and they do different damage, and I don't know. But yeah, that's a little too much for me. Was that? Did we nail it for you, Mac? Was that helpful? He wanted to know if someone who enjoys Twilight 2K would enjoy it. What do you think?
Well, I think the rules are very different. Obviously, Twilight 2000 was not an OSR game or anything, a D&D based game. But if it's not about the rules and it's about like the setting context, yeah, I think you would like it.
Cool. Yeah, sounds like that's good. Right on. So Pundit, for yourself, what is, like, outside of your own products, what's your favorite D&D game to play? Like, what's your favorite one that you like to play? Your RPG, I guess I'll say. What's your favorite?
Well, outside of my own stuff, I've played a lot of other OSR games, and definitely in the past, the Lamentations of the Flame Princess, which was James Raji's game, was one that I played quite a lot in years past. My Dark Albion campaign started as a Lamentations game. It started with those rules. And then over time, I realized it didn't quite manage to do the medieval thing right. So I started making some changes, and like with the party, we would change the rules. And it gradually evolved into the system that you see in Lion and Dragon, right? But so in a way, Lamentations is an ancestor of Lion and Dragon. I love DCC. DCC is one of the best RPGs of the OSR genre, right? And unfortunately nowadays, Goodman Games is kind of, I guess, politically woke and what have you. But the rules of the Dungeon Crawl Classics are incredible, and they were a big game changer because it like connected for a lot of people that were then working in the second wave of the OSR, that you can go a lot farther than you think in terms of changing some of the rules, and it's still working, and it's still being compatible, and it's still feeling like D&D. So that was really revolutionary, and I love the core rules of DCC.
Well, they got a great aesthetic, like I love, like, their email list when I was subscribed to it was always super fun. All the art and stuff by Stefan Poeg and others. It just looks really fun. And, I actually backed the Dungeon Denizens. And then after doing that, Goodman kind of, became pretty disappointing, unfortunately, with all the woke stuff. So, but anyway, that's a bit of a sad story. But yeah, DCC. Okay, so
I love the products that the Red Room comes out with. It's part of the reason they were banned from Drive-Thru, and so I decided to do the Pundit files on their store specifically as a way to bring attention to that store. And they make really great games. They have a particular style, of course, and same thing with, for example, Venger Satanis. He's a bit wacky. some of his stuff is too weird, right? Or and certainly some of it is probably not apt for children, that's for sure. But he makes some very fun material to run, if you're actually like, like his dungeons make no sense, but they're a lot of fun, like it's what I call stupid gonzo.
Yeah.
And he's very good. And I've read tons of other stuff that has been and worked or ran tons of other stuff in my games that I'm having trouble. Yoon Soo-in, for example, is pretty cool. Jesus, what else? I know there's a bunch of stuff I'm forgetting right now of stuff that I like. I'm mostly, I'm a big admirer of OSR stuff. Now, outside of the OSR, I like, Call of Cthulhu and the BRP system and all that. I like Palladium. I think Palladium has a really undeservedly bad reputation among some people. Its design isn't exactly tight, you could say, but it's actually like really brilliant how successful they were and still are to some degree. With like they're one of the last old companies. Them and Chaosium are the last two old companies that are really unbreakably still around, from the early days.
I think their products would work really good as settings.
Oh yeah, they're Kevin Siembiada was brilliant at settings, and Eric Wujik, who was like my mentor in RPGs. He was amazing in like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and all that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Another one that I love is Amber, which was made by Eric Wujik, not by Palladium though. Which seems like a very unusual. Yeah, it's kind of like totally not D&D. It's a completely different game.
Well, other than D&D Dad and Son, which is certainly your favorite channel on YouTube, no doubt. What are some of the other YouTube like RPG channels that you like?
Well, of all the RPG channels, the one that I probably watch the most often is Diversity and Dragons.
Yeah.
Not as often as I like in live, because his live streams are always on a Wednesday night. On Wednesday nights, most of the time, I'm going to dinner at a friend's house, Bill the Elf's house, who's like he's the longest running character in my DCC campaign, and the guy's like a professional. He's like a professional level cook. He's like an unbelievable cook. So I have to go, and so I always miss the live stream when it's live. I always watch it after. Other channels that I really like, with the Red Room channel, Driving and Dragons. Now I don't want to miss anyone that I would, like that's going to complain later. Hey, why didn't you mention me? I have to admit, I don't watch.
I was going to say, Diversity and Dragons for me, like I love it. I love it so much. Unfortunately, like I have like a youth group for church that I kind of supervise every Wednesday at 7 Eastern. And so I jump in late on it, unfortunately. Kind of, darn it, because I love the show so much. It's so much fun.
But yeah, Driving and Dragons is really good. Roll Stats is a really good review channel. I do reviews on my channel, and I've seen a lot of other reviews on YouTube that are bad, right? They're not good as reviews, right? They're either, a lot of them are either just like fawningly positive, or they're like, you suspect that they're ads or something, and then some of them are just not detailed enough, But Roll Stats does really good RPG reviews, and he reviews a lot of like old modules of D&D, which is useful, because there's a ton of people that probably don't know, what are these different dungeons from like the 70s and 80s,
I like watching those. Yeah, I like watching.
I don't watch Venger very much, but some people like his channel, I guess, sort of.
Well, Max says he watches you. Max says he watches you. He watches Pickled Dragon. I'm not familiar with that one. Driving and Dragons.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with Pickled Dragon.
Daddy Roll the One. I do watch Daddy Roll the One because it's that guy is like an encyclopedia of D&D history. It's very fun.
The name sounds familiar to me, but I don't recall if I've ever watched it or not.
Yeah, he's like the guy. He's absolutely like this living encyclopedia of D&D, and it's a very fun history lesson to watch his shows. Now, there was one I made a response video to one of his because he was like talking about like women in old school D&D, and he kind of let his politics show a little too much, and so me and the kids kind of like went through the video a little bit and made a response. It's actually one of, I think, are pretty good videos. But other than that, like he's got a really good channel, and he seems like an interesting guy that you could, have a barbecue with or something. So, and Flint Fireforge, I haven't heard of that one.
I've heard of the name, but again, I can't recall for sure if it's someone I've watched.
Those are good recommendations. Those are good suggestions.
Yeah. The Evil DM is kind of good. Well, pretty good, I'd say. What other stuff? Let me take a look here at my YouTube channel or my YouTube subscriptions and see what else. Because inevitably someone's going to come and bitch me out now for not having mentioned them.
Yeah, not having said. Yeah.
What else do I watch here? The Greyhawk Grognard is especially. You like Greyhawk?
He's good. I like him. He's a nice guy.
Roll Stats I mentioned.
Oh, 10 Cars Tavern. Flint is
10 Cars Tavern it's often informative, and so like once in a while they get the drop even on me for like some kind of news flash, and that's useful. You got to be really into like the intricacies of the hobby to go like, and then sometimes 10 Card gets like crazy about something in particular. Like he hated the guy from that had like taken over the new TSR and was like, crazy with that for a while. Like sometimes it's weird stuff that he gets into there.
DM Bloodworth, he's good.
Oh yeah, DM Bloodworth, yeah. What else? Any others? Well, it used to be that there was what was his name now? Jesus, how can I have forgotten? Aaron the Pedantic used to have a really good channel, but he kind of exploded, I guess.
Exploded?
Yeah. Well, it was him and his girlfriend, Dolly Prop, was actually much more interesting than he was. And then I think when they broke up, they're.
Oh, I see. Not stable. Okay. Well, Pundit, what's next for you?
Well, for me, I'm about to release this next month. It's going to come out sometime probably in the middle to late July. Is going to be a setting book that is tied to Baptism of Fire because it takes place at the same time period as Baptism of Fire, but it's called The Last Vikings, and it's a setting book about basically about the Viking world at the time of the 10th century, the late 10th century, and early 11th. And it's focused on the Joms Vikings, which was the last outpost of pagan Vikings in the by then Christianized Viking world. And this is a really interesting historical fact because for a long time there was a debate as to whether these guys even existed or not, right? Because there was supposed to have been this group of pagan Vikings that were the last pagan holdouts outside of like Greenland, right? But they were like right on the Baltic. They were somewhere on the Baltic. Nobody knew exactly where. And they were like these very powerful mercenaries. They had like this order called the Joms Vikings who were kind of like a brotherhood, but they worked as like mercenaries and pirates. And they had participated, according to history, in a number of the most important battles, especially like the Battle of Solder, which was the biggest Viking naval battle of all time. Wow. And Canute the Great's conquest of England, right? And so, like you, as a historian, look at this and go, well, this is probably right. But for the longest time, just because it seemed so improbable, they were considered a myth, right? And in the last several decades, people started to re-examine that, and now the historians are fairly certain, like we'll say 80% sure that they really did exist in some form or another, and they existed in a place called the island of Volyn, which is right off the coast of Pomerania, which is like right next door to Poland at that time, right? And they had, in fact, a connection with the Polish crown and with the Danish crown, right? So, so in the game, in the setting, you could play other types of Vikings, right? But the default setting assumes that you're going to be Yoms Vikings that are going out, participating in these like raids and piracy or in mercenary work or in adventuring. And it's got all the same kind of concepts that I have in my other games, which is that the magic that is in the system for like some of the new classes are like Viking magic, right, which is different from other magic. There's a whole bunch of sections on Viking Norse pagan mythology, and there's magic items that come out of Norse pagan stories and monsters and some really weird
get an Ulfbert sword.
Can you get a what?
The Ulfbert sword. Ulfbert. It's that Viking sword that was like
the one that was signed,
way ahead of its time. Yeah, I think it had a name.
Yeah, that's in it. Yeah. That's in the book. Yeah.
Oh, cool. That's great. Yeah, that's
one of the items you could potentially get. Yes, and of course, there I also have for the first time I've had in any of my books I have rules on like maritime travel and maritime encounters and that sort of thing, which is something because basically none of my other settings required it. I never had to include that, right? So I have stats on Viking ships and a naval combat system, and I think it's going to be a really popular product because Vikings are always popular. So
we've got Viking blood. Well, at least we have Swedish blood in us for sure. Back a long ways. So next up, Vikings for RPG Pundit. I'm going to have to come out with something to compete with that, I'm sure.
Hey, Dad, don't worry. You remember I got something cooking.
Was that? Oh,
you remember I got that adventure module cooking.
More or less.
By the way, RPG Pundit, in The Last Viking, when the party is making a naval check, if they roll a natural 1, do they immediately fight the world serpent?
No, but if you roll a natural 1 while you're navigating, you're probably going to get lost.
Yeah,
sounds like a Josh thing to do.
And then you meet, Jormungandr. Well,
there are like all kinds. There's a ton of sea monsters from the Baltic and North Sea, mythology, and they're all in there. You might run into evil mermaids or a sea giant or the Kraken or stuff like that. And what was I going to say? Jeez, no, I've lost my train of thought. I was going to comment on something you said, but right. That the North and the Baltic Sea, it's very funny because like even with technology like Viking era technology, you can cross it in just like 2 to 5 days, depending on where you're starting and where you're going, right? And sometimes one day. If you're going from Sweden to Denmark, it takes less than a day in a boat from that time period, right? And yet people got lost all the time, right? Because one of the problems they had is they didn't have navigation the way we have it, right? They didn't know latitude and longitude. They couldn't, so they had to go by like the position of the sun and stuff like that. So suddenly it gets overcast. You could be in real trouble unless you have like a sunstone or you have a really experienced seaman on the boat there who knows how to guide you.
Wow, that's scary. Kids, do you have any questions for RPG Pundit?
Yeah, will you be able to shill and promote our adventure module if and when it comes out?
Well, you'd have to send me a PDF of at the very least a PDF of it so I could take a look at it, because just like with my reviews, I will promote stuff that I really like, so if I see it and I think it's good, I think it's interesting, then I'll promote it. Right? I don't ever take payment to promote a product, right? So
don't worry, we'll be paying you.
Promoting something, it's because I really like it.
We'd be paying you with absolutely nothing.
You can send it to me, and then I can tell you, or possibly tell the public what I think.
Yeah. Well, he would be honest, Josh. So you'd have to be, you'd have to be ready for that. But it's really just in concept stage right now. He's kind of jumping the gun. It's a concept right now.
I've been doing reviews since my blogging years, since like 2005 until now, right? And I've received tons of stuff to review. And my rule has always been the same. I will review. If you send me a physical copy of the product, I will review it nowadays on video. Back then it was in the blog. But I give no guarantees as to whether I'll say it's good or it's bad. But there's been a phenomenon that has happened right from the beginning, pretty much, that's called the pundit bump, which is that it doesn't matter if I say I hate this book, it's shit, right? It still gets more sales, right? So that's why people will take the risk of sending it,
no matter what,
the attention of it being me. And there's some people that hate me, right? So, oh, if the pundit doesn't like it, I'm going to buy it, stuff like that.
So it's a win. You can't lose.
That's why people, I like to ship a book, especially if it's like a bigger book or something like that, all the way to South America. It's expensive. Like it's very, and it's more expensive because here the mail system is so corrupt that if you send it by regular mail, there's a 90% chance it'll never arrive, right? So you have to send it via a courier of some kind, right? So that's going to be more money. And there's people, writers and publishers that go for that, to send me a physical copy, because I won't review a PDF on my videos, right? Because I don't know how to put up a pretty PDF on camera, right, or on screen. You know, with the book, I can like open the book, I can show you the pages, you know, and it's okay. So, but they'll spend that money because they know even if I don't love the book, the number of views it'll get from people that are like very seriously into purchasing RPG stuff is likely to increase their sales beyond whatever the cost was of shipping it, you know?
Well, yeah, no, that's really good. I mean, Josh has some ideas, which I love to see. He wants me to draw the pictures, so I'll do that for him, I'm sure.
Well, you know, one of my upcoming pundit files, you know who Sandy Peterson is? He's the creator of the Call of Cthulhu RPG.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So Sandy Peterson has a 13-year-old grandson, and his 13-year-old grandson drew a map that he calls the Dungeon of Doom, and it's very clearly a comical map. This kid's pretty advanced in terms of his comedy style, right? It's very gonzo. It's very funny. Right, and proud grandpa Sandy Peterson put it on his Twitter account, right? Hello. And he put it on his Twitter account, and he's like, look at what my grandson made. He was really happy about it, right? And a bunch of people really liked it, right? And I'm friends with Sandy. I've interviewed him like twice, once in Inappropriate Characters and once in the Pundit Encounter. And I looked at this dungeon. I said, hey, would your grandson like for me to make an actual dungeon module out of that map? Right? He goes, oh yeah, he'd love it. Yeah, totally. Right. So next month, my next issue of the Pundit Files is going to be the Dungeon of Doom, right? Where I take his map and I make it into a really deadly dungeon, because that's what it is. It's a very deadly dungeon. Right? So you can make, you know, like, I advise going for it and making the dungeons, and you know, just give it a shot, you know, because you never know what might happen.
Yeah.
Awesome. Anything from you, Abigail? We've gotten plenty from Greta.
We have. Yeah. That's cool.
Abby,
Oh.
No, not you.
Yes, sweetie.
She's going to come back in 5 minutes.
Well, Pundit, thank you so much
Thank you
for coming on our show. And I think it's been great having you. And
yeah, it was lovely.
So much fun. And you've, you know, given us so much to talk about and think about.
She's here now.
Sorry, I think we got like 16 people watching right now. That's not too bad.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for watching. I sure appreciate that. And you know, you guys are awesome. Thank you so much. And And Pundit, thank you so much for coming on the channel, even after all the razzing we did
Hi,
on this channel. Hi,
I thought it was great. It was really fun. I love that video.
Of your channel.
I was wondering if you might hit back or something, and like, oh, what if you came
The
out with
Hobbit teleports.
something around me? But yeah.
Hi, Dad.
Hi, sweetie. Well, I think we'll probably. Oh, thanks, Richard. Richard's subscribed to me. I appreciate that, bud. That's awesome. Thank you. I'll try and make it worth your while and bring some quality stuff to you guys. My channel's a bit of a mix. I got live play with my kids. I've got we have some commentary stuff, and sometimes lately we've been doing some interviews with some great people. So we'll try to make it interesting for you. Thank you so much, Pundit. You've been awesome. Thank you very much. And everybody, thank you. You guys have a good night, and we will talk to you again soon sometime.
I like that.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
See you.
I don't know what to press.
You press